Ho ho buddies, welcome to Borderline Games. We're finally there in Chaos Head. We're playing Chaos Head, by the way. We're finally there. We're at the Crying Sky ending. We're in the middle of it. We've just experienced the group dive. We saw that there was hundreds of people on the roof of the group dive. I feel like that must have been a delusion because there was no evidence when the roof of the building was inspected. And then what the group dive participants experienced was a magical staircase that kind of went down to the next building opposite, or the next adjacent building. And then they stepped on that, and obviously that was another delusion, and they fell straight to the death. And now we're going to see another scene that burst forth in front of him. So Takumi is witnessing this through other people's eyes. Interesting. I was walking down Tamagoa Dori. My body was completely intact. Yet the sensation of crashing into the ground remained distinct. Through no will of my own, I was walking down the street as if it were any other day. This body was more in shape than my own. This wasn't me. I had a terrible feeling about this. Suddenly I noticed a strange man walking toward me, and when I saw him, I was forced to acknowledge that my terrible feeling had been warranted. The man passed me. He was wearing a fairly normal suit, but on his head he had a Darth Spider helmet. It was all too surreal. So hang on. Let me just read that again. Okay, the body was more in shape than my own. I noticed a strange man walking toward me. Okay, so this person is meeting Suwa, who has this Darth Spider helmet on. There wasn't anyone else around. I wanted to run away as soon as possible. And yet, despite my wishes, the owner of the body my consciousness had invaded looked over their shoulder at the man he'd just passed. Darth Spider was right behind me. He was so close I could almost feel his breath. And then, bursting out of my blind spot, his fist flew straight into my stomach. Uh-oh. All the strength left my body and my vision went black. Not long after I lost consciousness, I began to feel an intense searing pain spreading throughout my abdomen. When I opened my eyes, I was in an operating room. Wearing only white scrubs, Hazuki Shino was standing in front of me. Her scrubs were wide open, revealing her bloodied abdomen. Even though her face was a sickly pale, she looked at me with a gentle smile. Oh yeah, so she shoved her baby inside this man. That's how this person died, right? In her hand was a scalpel. A scalpel was slowly laid against my stomach. She applied some pressure, and with a slight ripping sound, a small incision appeared on my skin. It's the grossest one. Blood spurted from the wound, dancing through the air before landing on Hazuki Shino's face, and yet despite that, the same bright smile stayed plastered on her face. I watched in horror and pain as she slowly sliced me open. I'd seen this scene once before, back when I'd read Hazuki's memories. The man-child case. The pain in my stomach was becoming unbearable. Screaming and sobbing, I tried to escape somehow by thrashing around, but my limbs were all fastened to the bed. I was unable to move. Any movement would lead to the pain in my abdomen growing far more intense. May the divine light save you, sir. With her hand resting upon my cleanly sliced open skin, Hazuki began poking around in the gushing wound with her fingers. That alone pierced me with enough agony to shatter my mind. I could very clearly feel the sensation of her fingers writhing around inside me. And then, just as I had seen in her memories, Hazuki forcefully widened the wound. Oh, hang on. Oh god, it's going too fast. I can't stop it. Right. Just as I'd seen in her memories, Hazuki forcefully widened the wound from both sides, the sensation of skin and flesh tearing. The lack of anesthesia left the pain raw and unfiltered, causing me, along with the owner of the body, to lose consciousness. Only to be woken up immediately after by the overwhelming pain. Oh, I see. Only to be woken up immediately after by the overwhelming pain. Okay. But Hazuki kept forcefully widening the wound all the same. The details no longer mattered to me, such as where it hurt, or where specifically on my body the pain was erupting from. I hallucinated all my nerve endings being pierced with searing hot needles. I passed out again. But I couldn't escape. The pain mercilessly forced my consciousness back awake. I let my body writhe in pain. I found myself thinking that if it would release me from this suffering, I'd be willing to bite my tongue off, but just as I thought that, I saw something. There in Hazuki's hand was a blood-soaked fetus. Something that served only to make her smile all the more revolting. This woman was well and truly insane. She took the corpse of the fetus she'd removed from her own body and then plunged it deep inside my abdomen. Why did it need to be this? Like, is this just following, like, some kind of prophecy? Her hand and the fetus was gripping tightly in it, shoved aside my organs, gouged out my flesh, and gnawed deeper and deeper inside me. I began to vomit blood, but even though it was threatened to suffocate me, gargling screams rose from my drowning throat without end. Perhaps due to the pain overloading my brain, my head felt strangely foggy. This is some body horror stuff. And yet, despite that fogginess, the pain refused to get any more bearable, and I began to comprehend less and less of what was happening. Pain was all that ruled my mind. Hazuki then withdrew her hand from my stomach and nodded in satisfaction. Then, as if attending a patient, she spoke a few soft words. "You've done so well." But the very second she finished speaking, she suddenly lost consciousness and her body collapsed to the floor. At around the same time, someone else entered the operating room. The sound of his shoes reverberated throughout it. It's the Darth Spider, but I had no interest in whoever it was. The sole thing I focused on was continuing my bawling and screaming, unable to feel anything but agony. Seeing the unnatural expansion of my stomach, I fell into a panic. Along with the pain, I began to feel an itchiness. It was itchy. Really, really itchy. I wanted to scratch it, but my hands were tied to the bed, so I couldn't. Suddenly, a shadow obstructed my view. It was Darth Spider, appearing from almost nowhere. He picked up Hazuki in his arms, exited the operating room with her, then came back alone a few moments later. He was carrying a sewing needle and some nylon thread. What he was thinking I didn't know, until he slowly began to stitch together the wound on my stomach. The pain was practically nothing, compared to the pain of having a foreign object shoved inside me, nor the agony of having my flesh ripped open. Darth Spider's sewing was incredibly sloppy. Even a grade schooler could have done better. Every time he pulled up the fishing line, it chafed against the chasms he'd opened in my skin. The itchiness grew more intense. An unbearable itchiness. An itchiness that seemed to well up from deep inside me. Itchy. 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 I wanted to scratch it. If he'd just let me, I wouldn't even mind if I died. The tingling itch combined with the pain. And yet, even more than the pain, the itch threatened to drive me completely insane. Whew. Due to my mental state, it took me a while to notice that the scenery had changed once again. I felt slight relief from the pain and the itchiness, but the sensation hadn't completely disappeared. Even now, as I stumbled through Shinsen, I felt an itch in the center of my body. But along with that itch, I felt the sensation of a foreign object in my abdomen, as well as the pain of a needle weaving in and out of my body. They all remained as distinct, lingering discomforts. Continuing to torment my mind even now. I was on an unlit, rarely used road. As I walked down it, I saw a figure coming toward me. The road was so narrow we would have had to turn sideways in order to even pass each other. But when I saw what the figure looked like, my body turned to ice. Yet again, it was the man dressed as Darth Spider. We passed each other. Darth Spider didn't give any kind of reaction. My heart was beating out my chest, and then something surfaced in my mind. An incredibly compulsive urge, one that made no sense for me to feel. A crusty old fuck had been hitting on my girl. It pissed me off like you wouldn't believe. I wanted to kill him. That extremely abrupt feeling drove me forward. The face of my girl was foggy in my memories. I couldn't remember her very well, to the point where I wasn't sure if she even asked in the first place. And yet the crusty old fuck who'd been hitting on my girl was crystal clear in my mind. I'd seen his face before. He was the victim of the crucifixion case. Right, okay. My memory launched forward, placing me in a dark, narrow alley. An alley I knew all too well, the scene of the crucifixion. And right in front of me was the victim of the case. He was a middle-aged man, and my hands were wrapped tightly around his neck. His body convulsed violently. Bubbles frothed from his mouth and his eyes rolled back into the back of his head. Upon learning what it felt like to have someone's life disappear in my hands, I went slightly cold. Eventually the man stopped moving. When Kameda, the perpetrator of this case, confirmed he was dead. Hang on. Who is that? Am I supposed to know who that is? One second. Am I supposed to know who this is? I feel like I've seen that name before. Kameda. Maybe I feel like I've seen that before because it's Nagato Kameda. The perpetrator, so maybe I haven't seen this person. He was dead. I released my hands from his neck and let him collapse to the ground. I gave him a single parting kick in the side, then immediately went to leave. Ugh. I heard a voice, and when I turned around, the man who was supposed to be dead was getting up. Eyes still rolled into the back of his head, and then he reached for me. With a yelp, I punched him, knocking him to the ground. But even though his movements were sluggish, he kept getting back up no matter how many times I hit him. I grabbed his neck again. Just as I'd done earlier, but this time with even more force. I wrung my hands tightly around his neck. I put all the strength I had into my grip, applying enough pressure to snap the bones in his neck. He stopped moving again. It's interesting there's no music, it makes it all the more uncomfortable. This time I put my ear up to his mouth, and once I'd made absolutely sure he wasn't breathing, I let him drop. I watched his body for a while. And then somehow, the man who should have died twitched violently and began rising back to his feet. So this is a delusion, I guess? The expression on his face was one clearly fitting of a dead man's and didn't change even slightly as he moved. Rising up from the ground, he started coming toward me. As I stumbled back in fear, I stepped on something. Startled, I looked down at my feet. A large number of cross-shaped stakes were scattered across the street. I had to stop him from moving any more. I had to drive a stake into the monster that I was facing. If I didn't, I'd be screwed. Overwhelmed by the impending danger, I shoved the man against the wall before he could finish getting up. I picked up a stake. And before I knew it, I was gripping a hammer in my other hand, which I'd found from somewhere. Once again, I found myself in an operating room, but it wasn't the man-child case again. Despite knowing that, the pain from the experience coupled with the sensation of a foreign object in my stomach continued to torture me. It ground away at my each and every nerve ending. I could see two figures in my field of vision. They both were still as could be. staring in my direction with bated breath. One of them was Darth Spider, and the other was Hazuki Shino. Her scrubs weren't soaked in blood this time, which was what had led me to believe that this was a different case than the man-child one. I was lying in a bed. A needle for an IV was embedded in my arm. However, nothing was being injected into me. The liquid in the tube was flowing backward, and the liquid was... blood. My blood. The blood that circulated within this body was being sucked out through the IV. At the end of the tube, there was only an extremely dirty bucket. Ugh. It was filled to the brim with blood. The blood continued to fall into the bucket. Drip, drip, drip. My head felt fuzzy. I was incredibly dizzy. I was assailed by an intensely peculiar sensation, one where a pleasant feeling like my consciousness was floating away, intermixed with the pain and itchiness left over from the man-child case. Then, as if showing off to me, Darth Spider and Hazuki tenderly embraced each other like lovers. As the two supported one another, Hazuki's face couldn't have looked happier. I couldn't understand how she could make a face like that, while in the middle of creating the dried-up corpse from the vampire case. Before I could think about why I couldn't understand it. I see, so that's what's going on. The pain grew far more intense, my throat was sapped of all moisture, my vision gradually darkened and my consciousness slowly grew thinner and thinner, until eventually it evaporated completely. I then realised this was a vicarious experience. Vicarious experience? Vicarious. Pronounce it for me. Vicarious is what it is. Right? Vicarious.
Vicarious.
Okay, I'm glad we established that. I was being forced to experience the series of New Gen murders vicariously. I was facing the pain of each case, the fear, one by one. If that was true, there then were still 3 remaining. Realizing that, my despair pulled me down even deeper. Why was this happening? Doctor? Someone called out to me and I came back to myself. I should have been in the operating room, but I was standing in the hallway of some hospital. Dr. Takashina. Unsurprisingly, through no will of my own, my body turned around. Behind me was Hazuki Shino, accompanied by a somewhat somber expression. I see, it's her. Excuse me, Doctor, I'd like a word with you. I'd attract attention out here, so please follow me. Her voice apologetic, Hazuki entered an examination room. My mind screamed, "Don't go!" at Dr. Takashina, but unsurprisingly my voice didn't reach him. It was currently after hours at the hospital, so no one else was in the exam room. Hazuki walked steadily toward the center of it. I, Dr. Takashina, followed her without even the slightest doubt. And then she abruptly stopped. Just as I wondered what she was doing, a man wearing something black on his head leapt out from the darkness. I reeled back, startled, only for the man to shove something akin to a piece of gauze over my mouth, and just like that my consciousness was stolen away. Damn you, Suwa. An ear-piercing noise rang through my head. My skull was vibrating violently. God. But it wasn't just vibrating, it was being shaved to dust. I felt that sensation incredibly clearly. Here we go. The sound died down, and when I opened my eyes, I was in the operating room once again. Like a collection of numerous eyes, many lights bore down on me from the ceiling. They shone down on me brilliantly, illuminating my face. Your cranium has been removed, Doctor. Doctor, your draw matter is so pretty. Oh, this is, Hazuki. In a thoroughly enchanted tone, Hazuki said those words, picked up a pair of scissors, and used them to cut away the solid membrane covering my brain. Oh my god. I felt the sensation directly and immediately following it. I was seized by a sickening, almost frustrating feeling. Reality. I, or rather Dr. Takashina, hadn't known that Hazuki had the ability to perform surgery, let alone open brain surgery. As a result of this, my mind erupted with surprise, followed by me noticing that my body was incapable of moving due to the anesthesia. Hazuki wasn't alone in the operating room. Darth Spider was there. The man wearing black from before, Darth Spider, was there too. But he said nothing, he simply stood in place, not moving a muscle. There have been cases in which non-respirated patients have remained alive in a state of brain death for upwards for an entire week. Were you aware of this? Without losing the gentle smile on her face, Hazuki whispered something strange in my ear. In other words, people can live for quite a long time without the brain. Doctor, how long will you live for, I wonder? I shuddered. An unfathomable terror rose up from within me. Hazuki held a spoon in front of my eyes, only for it to leave my vision soon after. This is very Hannibal Lecter, right? Dr. Takashina, may the divine light save you. Without warning, I felt a foreign object being forced inside me. Inside my head. Not inside my head in the sense that it wasn't really happening. Something had literally been forced inside my head. Okay, thanks for clarifying. I felt the sensation of something entering me, then moving around. It's so gross. There was no pain. However, it was more than enough to fill me with disgust and terror. Hazuki shook off a piece of something into a tray sitting beside me. Only moving my eyes, I looked over to try and see what it was. It was a beautiful pink colour, but it had been smashed into a pulp. It reminded me of soft salmon roe. Realizing it was my brain, my sense of dread peaked. I pleaded with her. Please stop. Ha! Ha! Salvation. But Hazuki's hand didn't stop moving. Instead, her expression turned to one of pure ecstasy. Her cheeks were stained a bright scarlet as she carelessly dug through my Dr. Takashina's brain, taking more of it with every scoop. Suddenly I was having fun. I wanted to laugh. Suddenly I harboured an intense hatred. Suddenly I felt happy. Suddenly a furious lust burned within me, rising up and constricting my chest. She stirred my brain, stirring my emotions along with it. I'm pretty sure that's not what happens, right? You just very quickly become brain dead, I'd assume. Emotions different to what I myself felt boiled up within me. Emotions different to what I myself felt boiled up within me. Okay, I got it. Because of these emotions, my mind, heart and soul were drifting away from the consciousness known as me, forcing me to confront the ambiguity of my own existence. As the mental R word, I don't know whether I'm allowed to say that on YouTube, that sought to deny my own existence tore my mind to shreds. I found myself walking under a railway overpass. If I went off the case order this time, it would be the finger food case. Hang on. If I went off case order this time, it would be the finger food case. That's right. As I'd expected would happen, my body was now a woman's. I was incredibly hungry. Perhaps the victim had been on a diet or something. I crossed paths with the man in the Darth Spider costume once again. Everywhere I went, he would show up, considering how much his appearance stood out. Why hadn't the police or mass media gotten anything on him at all? That looks pretty tasty, eh? It was the first time Darth Spider had said anything. He pointed at my right hand as he spoke. It was a surreal spectacle. For some reason I was holding 5 bare chicken skewers, each one sticking out from the gaps between my fingers. Warm-looking steam rose from them, and as did the juicy aroma of cooked meat. Both things further stimulated my appetite, saliva overflowing from my mouth. Unable to wait another second, I took a bite. Sharp pain shot through my finger, but I couldn't stop chewing. I never had such incredible, delicious chicken in my entire life. Tons of juices escaped from the meat, dribbling down onto the pavement below. It was delectable. It was to die for. In the blink of an eye, I'd cleaned the skewers completely. Before I knew it, Darth Spider had disappeared. But it didn't matter much to me. I didn't even care about that strange man at all. I wanted to keep eating. My stomach cried out for more food. The fingers on my right hand throbbed with pain, but my hunger easily overrode it. Once again I looked at my right hand, and that's when I realised I hadn't just been holding chicken skewers. I'd also been carrying a large slab of meat. The glorious protein was still fastened to the bone, with its dripping juices staining the sleeves of my blouse a dark shade of red. When had I gotten my hands on this? How long had I had it for? That question too quickly became unimportant when faced with my overwhelming hunger. I sank my teeth into the meat with all the strength I could muster. Excruciating pain. I ripped a chunk off. Chewed it. Tasted it. Then gulped it down. Meat was tender and it carried a fair amount of fat. I bit deeper. Both my hands and the area surrounding my mouth were greasy with fat, but I didn't care. I never experienced such incredible flavour before. I tore the meat off the bone. Fat melted and gushed throughout my mouth, leaving a unique aftertaste. It hurt. For some reason it hurt so bad I thought I would die, but I kept chewing. Compared to how large the bone was, there wasn't a lot of meat on it. It didn't take long for me to eat it all up. Finally, I licked off all the remaining tiny scraps of flesh that were left clinging to the bone. Every piece I set free, I suckled on, savouring the taste of meat and bone. The 5 slender bones protruding from the ends weren't too hard. If I wanted to, I could bite them off without much trouble. I gnawed on the bones. A fierce pain ripped through me. A pain so intense I nearly collapsed on the spot. Tears streaming down my face, I gleefully slurped on all the remaining juices that were oozing out from the inside of the bones. I tore free one of the bones. The intense stimulus led me to crumble to the ground, rolling the bone around in my mouth as I did. Chomp, crunch, crunch, munch. When I went to swallow it, the bone got stuck in my throat and I could no longer breathe. My legs swung around uncontrollably, kicking every which way. But before I knew it, a string had been wrapped around my ankles, stopping them in place. I could no longer move freely. Darth Spider was standing in front of me. Writhing in agony, the exposed bones of my right hand struck the ground. The impact sent violent rippling waves of pain throughout my entire body, and I immediately pissed myself. Okay, great. And I'd never opened my eyes again. Wow, that one was quite graphic. So the last one is the DQN puzzle. I opened my eyes in a dim black alley. Back alley. The scenery was a little different from before. It was the 7th and final new gen this time. Oh, this was 3 murder victims and they were all kind of made up of each other or something. Like the body parts had been swapped. I was walking down the alley while leaning on a male DQN's shoulder. His face was horribly beaten and he looked like he was about to cry. The 3 of them, including me, were in awful condition. Their clothes were soaked with blood, their faces were ridiculously swollen, and they all had a number of chipped teeth. The person who'd done this was probably me. It was the 3 DQNs that had beat me up. And after that had happened, they'd had their torsos torn apart and died. Once again, the man in the Darth Spider costume was there, standing at the end of where we were walking. Hey asshole, the fuck was that? The guy who was lending me his shoulder shouted at Darth Spider, but with his face as it was, any impact it could have had was pretty much halved. What the hell was up with that Nishijo piece of shit? He was like a fucking monster. So he turned the tables on you, and you ran away. Lame. Just give us the money already. Hand it over. Money? Don't play dumb with us. You said it yourself, asshole. You said you'd pay us if we scared Nishijo shitless. One of them grabbed Darth Spider, holding him by the collar. He lifted him up, then hit his black helmet with his hand. You had us go through some pretty fucked up shit. Take off the mask. Take off the fucking mask! He forced the helmet off. I'd already predicted the face that would be under it, and of course, there he was. Suwa Momoro, looking completely unfazed. He was Hazuki Shino's accomplice, so he was another culprit behind New Gen. Suwa rammed his knee deep into the stomach of the man grabbing him. His agile movement set him far apart from the reckless violence of the DQNs. Well, since I'm all done with you three. The ground shook slightly. What was that? Behind Suwa, there was a presence, hiding in the darkness deep within a narrow alley. Something was there, rumbling with an eerie growl, and from what I could tell, it wasn't a normal size. Even though we couldn't see it, the fierce bloodlust given off by that monster made all our hearts seize up. Oh my god. Eventually, with footsteps that sounded like the very ground itself was rumbling, it showed itself, a literal real-life monster. It was so unbelievably grotesque, nothing else like it existed on this earth. Its brown, slimy skin glistened, and its gigantic head sat wedged between its shoulders. Its scarlet eyes shone brightly, its mouth tore open on both sides, and its wrists were as thick as giant logs. The bipedal monster came up beside Suwa and opened its gaping maw wide as could be. Its rows of fangs glinted, reflecting the burning glare of the streetlights. Its roar was like a low, dull growl, and yet it was more terrifying than anything I'd ever heard. No beast could have ever hoped to compare. A roar with such ferocity, even the very souls of all who had heard it would tremble. What is that? Okay, so I'm really into Spark Wars. Sue was the only one who didn't seem bothered by the monster's appearance. On the contrary, he touched the monster's leg in blatant satisfaction, caressing it. This big guy is one of the aliens from it. Another roar. The monster stepped one step closer to the frozen still trio. We tried to run, but there was no escape. We screamed for help, but there was no one around for kilometers. An overwhelming difference in power, the difference in potential between our species was too great. The three of us were helpless when faced with the beast before us. For the first time in our lives, we experienced fear from the deepest depths of our hearts. When someone is frightened like that, they fall silent, shrink back, and can't move even a single muscle. And so the monster let out a single breath and swung its log-like arms. Bang. Gah! Ah! In an instant, as if they were mere ragdolls, the two of them were torn to shreds. Blood and viscera splattered across the alley, steam rising from the remains. The severed corpses of the two men were then viciously tossed aside, skewing them on the handles of a nearby telephone pole. I wonder how that was actually accomplished. And that just leaves you. Suwa's gaze pierced through me. I realised then that he was the one controlling the alien. I told myself this was a delusion, but there was no point. In the face of absolute terror and overwhelming brutality, I simply slumped to the ground and pissed myself. All I could do after that was look up in a daze at the monster, and then... red. My torso was ripped apart. I felt this is, in a way no other human could ever possibly experience, and then I stopped breathing. How many times had I died vicariously? And we're going to find out next time on Borderline Games how many times we've died vicariously. when we play another episode of Chaos Head. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Chaos Head, and I will see you next time. Have a great evening. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye. Bye 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 bye.